Welcome to Cheap Controls. We make videos on things that we struggled with, hoping to help you so you don't. Consider subscribing and hitting that bell. I had a viewer ask if I could make a video on controlling a relay and setting seconds to control the time that the relay is on. And then I also am going to show how to make it go between a one shot, so it's on for whatever time and then off, and cycle that time on and off. I'm going to start in the Nextion, and I already have the layout done on the buttons for this relay 1 and relay 2. They requested I do 6, but I'm going to do 2. I think by showing 2 I will display the general knowledge on how to do it. And so I can affect these relay buttons on whatever page I'm on. They're set to global, but the settings down here is just going to change the page. It's going to make it go to the second page. I'm going to set that up now. And then on the setting page I'll have a back button. That'll take us back to page 0. Below each title I'm going to have a button and a number field. And then the button will select between a one-shot timer, in other words you press that relay button, it triggers once and it shuts off. Or cycle, which will go between on and off, on and off. I'm going to leave it the same time on and off, so we'll have 50% duty cycle. And it'll be based upon the number that we have in that N0 and N1 fields. Now for N0 and N1, we're going to use a keypad, a numeric keypad. You have your choice of different things, but for this one we'll use the keypad. And I'm going to run this now in debug. And the reason I'm running it in debug is when you hit this button to change it, it brings up this keypad, but it already has the 1000 populated. If I wanted to make it a 2-second timer, I'd have to delete the 1000 first and then put 2000 in there. I'm going to use the timer set up for milliseconds, so 1000 milliseconds will equal 1 second. But I don't like having to do that. Actually, I set it for 20,000. We'll go back and you can see 20,000 is in there. I'd rather it start empty. We're going to leave it defaulted to 1000, so every time you restart the Nextion it'll be 1000. But we'll go down to where the keyboard is, and if you right click on it, you can unlock it. And when you go to unlock it, you get this warning, because if you modify it in the wrong way, you can wreck it. If you do wreck it, and you're using it tied to N0 and N1, just go back to these and remove the keyboard so it says none again, and then delete the keyboard and re-add it, and it'll put a fresh copy in there. But for now we'll click on the keyboard, and we know that the show is the one that we want to make be empty. On the page pre-initialize, it has a whole bunch of events, and at the very bottom it takes the input.txt, which is this variable right here, and puts it into that show.txt. And depending on the type of box that you're sending to it, and the type 54 is a number field, it will set that input.txt right here using the covx. So it's going to take the value from the page or from the place that we clicked on it, and it's going to move it into that input.txt. Well, we just don't want that to happen. So I'm just going to comment that out. Now we'll run debug again. And this time when we click on it, you'll see that it's empty. And I can put in 54546. Click OK, and it's back. And I click on it again, it's empty again. And that just makes it a little easier to enter the data, especially when you're doing it on the touch. Now that we have that set, you could right click on it and go down and lock it again. But we're just going to leave it alone for now. Now I'm going to go over the code for the buttons. And I do most of my work on the release. And we're going to use the same format that I use in all of mine. We're going to use the C:C, which is the first 3 digits. It's just my delimiter that says a command is being sent. And then we're going to use RC1 for relay control 1. And then we're going to send on, or if it's off, we'll send off. And we'll base that on the state of the button. It's a dual state button, so it'll be either 0 or 1 for a value. And if it's 1 or on, we'll send on. And if it's 0, we'll send off. And we're going to do the same thing for relay 2, but it'll be, instead of RC1 on and off, it'll be RC2. Now when we're running the relay in a cycle state where we want it to flip on and off and on and off, this will work great because we'll turn it on, and then when we're done, we'll turn it off. But in the one shot, once we turn it on, we want it to click once and then turn off. We'll have to do some feedback from the Arduino back up to the Nextion. And that's another reason why I made this global, so that we can affect it whatever page we're on. If we're in the settings, when we start the one shot, or if the one shot ends, it'll still shut the relay off and change the look of the button. And that's all there is to page 1. On page 2, we got the back button, but we already did that. And then for this one shot, it's also a dual state button. It is also set to global, and that's just in case I need to do something with the Arduino and affect that button. At this point, I don't believe I have anything in the Arduino for that, but I set it up that way just in case. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to do it based upon the value of the dual state button. If it's 0 or false, we're going to send the C:C and then relay method 1 shot. And then we'll change the text on the button to 1 shot. If it's equal to 1 or not 0, we're going to send C:C and relay method 1 again, but cycle as our command or our value, and then the question mark. I don't know if I said that earlier, but the question mark will be at the end of every string that we send to let us know that it's the ending delimiter. And then we'll change the text to cycle. That way we know that the relay is in the state that we want it to cycle the relay rather than one shot it. We're going to do the same thing for button 1. But in this case, we use C:C and relay method RM2 and shot and cycle. So those commands will be sent when we hit this button. For the number field, it's a little bit different. We already have it set in the script that will open the keyboard so we can alter the value. The way the Nextion works with the keyboard is it opens another page. So after you've made the change, it comes back to this page and it refreshes it. So instead of doing anything on change or on press, we're going to do it on the page itself. And we're going to do it on the post initialize. And this means whatever we put in here will also go when we go from page 0 to page 1. We'll also run these commands. So every time this page is either entered or refreshes, we're going to send both the values in N0 and N1. But since they're values, the first thing we'll have to do is we'll have to covex the value and change it into text, and we'll store it down in this temp variable down here. And then we'll use the send string variable to create the string we're going to send out. And we'll send C:C, our beginning delimiter, and relay time 1. And then we'll concatenate the temp.txt, which will be our time, and then we'll concatenate a question mark. Then we'll send it up, and then we'll do the same thing. But we'll get N1 value instead, and instead of C:C relay timer or RT1, we'll have RT2. And then we'll concatenate the temp string again because we'll have covexed it, or the temp.text. And then we'll concatenate a question mark, and then we'll send that up also. So what we have on the Nextion is we have the one-shot buttons sending the commands to the Arduino. We have the N0 and N1 sending the commands to the Arduino. And on this page we have the relay control sending commands to the Arduino. So all of our code and commands are in the Nextion, but the Nextion doesn't really do anything other than control variables that we're sending to the Arduino. Now we'll switch over to the Arduino. And when I went to load it, I had a little bit of an error. I'll comment that line out. That's just a little note to myself when I added it. Now over in the Arduino, I'm going to use a Nano for this. And I have a very customary setup where I have some variables already set for the Nextion display up here at the top. I have an end character set up that I can just add to the end of every string we send to the Nextion. And I have a variable where I collect the data that comes in from the display. Now I also always throw in an asynchronous delay, but in this case I'm going to be changing it because I'm going to have 2 delays, one for each relay. And so relay 1, I'm going to have a few different variables in it. I have this R1 delay long, and it has to just count from 0 up to the value of a word or a long. And then I have my R1 delay length, and that's the length that the delay will run if nothing's happening. It will run every 100 milliseconds when the relay is not in its on state. So it'll just be checking that asynchronous delay every 100 milliseconds. And the reason I'm going to do that is when it's not currently actuating the relay and we do hit it, I want it to actuate as quickly as possible. And then I have another variable called R1 relay time, and that's the value we're setting on the Nextion and sending down. And then I'm going to have a couple bools, or booleans. One will be R1 run, and that's just going to tell us if the button has been clicked on the Nextion if we want it to be currently in a run state. And we'll set it to false to start. And the other one will be the difference between cycle and one shot. So if it's false, it'll be a one shot. If it's true, it'll be in cycle, and the relay will continue to click on and off. And then I have the pin. I'm going to use pin 9 for the relay. And then we're going to have the exact same variables for relay 2. I'm going to have my long, which will go from 0 to a lot. And then I'm going to have my relay length set to 100, or my asynchronous delay length set to 100 milliseconds. I'm going to start my relay time at 1000, just like up above. That's the way I have it defaulted in the Nextion, so I'm just having it set in here. And then I'll have my R2 run and R2 cycle, which will tell me when it's in the run state and which way we want it to run. And then I'm going to use pin 10 for this one. And since I'm using a nano, I have to use the software serial 2 and 3 to connect to the Nextion. In the setup, I'll have to start up serial, the normal serial port, so I can get information from the Arduino if I need to debug. And then I'll also set up serial 2 to talk to the Nextion itself. And then in my standard setup, I use pin 13, the LED, just to test my asynchronous delay. In this case, we're not going to use it. But what I will be doing is I have to set up pin 9 and 10, or relay 1 and relay 2 pins, and set them up as outputs. Now in my main loop, I won't have to do anything to the serial 2 available. That's already set up. And we'll get to that, what it runs, but it will run the function LCD input, and it will collect that and store it in the DFD. Now the asynchronous delay, we're not using the one like we did in it delay long. Instead, we're going to use 2 separate ones. So we're going to do relay 1 asynchronous delay and relay 2 asynchronous delay. They both operate the same. They're just going to call different functions, R1 async delay and R2 async delay. And they're going to increment different variables and test different variables. And using 2 separate asynchronous delays will allow us to control the relays independently. And that's all we need on the main page. We're going to switch over to the LCD input, which is the function we call up there if there's serial available from the Nextion display. And this one I always have it already set up in a way, because if there's data available, I'm going to store it 1 character at a time in the DFD. And if that DFD.length is greater than 3, we're going to look for C:C. If those first 3 characters aren't C:C, we're going to erase it and start over because we've got some sort of an error. If it is, then we're going to start looking for that question mark. And if we see that question mark, we know we've got a command. And then we'll break the command out and the value out, and then we'll start messing with those. And we're going to start with the relay 1 commands first. And what I've done is I've tried to compact the code, and so what I've tied is an if statement along with a ternary statement. So the first thing we'll say is the command equal to RC1, or relay control 1? Have we pushed the button to start the relay? And if that value, if we have, and the value is on, then we want it to, we'll set that R1 value to true. So start executing the relay, either turn it on for a 1 shot or cycle it. If it's set to off, then we'll set that run value to false. So we'll turn it off. But if we get the value of anything other than on, so if garbage comes through after the RC1, it'll set it to false and turn it off. And the next command is the same thing. We'll have the if command and then a ternary command. So if the command is equal to relay method 1 or RM1 and the value is equal to cycle, then we're going to set R1 cycle to true. In other words, we're going to turn the relay on and off until we get an off signal up above in that RC1. If it's not set to cycle, it'll do a one shot and it'll set R1 cycle equal to false, and the relay will trigger once and then turn off. And then the last one we're looking for is the relay time for relay 1. And when we collect that, we're just going to set the relay time, or R1 relay time, equal to the value dot turned into an int, to int. Because it comes in as text, so we'll need to turn that into an integer. Then we're going to do the same thing for relay 2. Now over on the async delay page, I normally have this initial async delay, but in this case I've replaced it with two other functions. This R2 async delay and R1 async delay. I have two separate ones, and that way the relays will work independently. So I can just replace that with these two functions. And for each function they're going to be similar, but what we'll do is we'll test that R1 run variable. Because if it's true, then we're going to do something with the relays. If it's false, then I just want to verify that that pin, that relay 1 pin, is low. And the same thing for the R2 async delay. If R2 is set to run, we're going to do something, which I don't have anything in there yet. But if it's false, we'll run the else statement, and we're going to run that digital write, or we'll make sure that digital write R2 pin is low. And then that way, if it gets into a weird state, we know that it will just go to low. Now if we do set it to run and it's true, then we're going to check and see whether our cycle is true or false. If the cycle is set to true, then we want to turn the relay on and off and on and off. And we do that by just flipping the pin, flipping that R1 pin. So what we'll do is we'll digital write the R1 pin, and normally after that you would go low or high. But what we're going to do is we're going to read the current state of it and we're going to invert it. So that way if it's high, we'll turn it to low. If it's low, we'll turn it to high. Now for this async delay, we're going to, right now if we were to run it, we would do it every 100 milliseconds because that's what we have our async delay time set at. We're not using that time that we set on the Nextion yet. We'll get to that a little bit later. And in the R2 async delay, we're going to do the same thing. In this case, it'll be R2 cycle. So if R2 cycle is set to true, then we're going to just flip that R2 pin instead of the R1 pin. Now if that R1 cycle pin is false, then that means we want to do a one shot. So we're going to go down there, and the first time through this loop, when it's set to one shot, we're going to take that R1 pin, we're going to make sure that it's low, because it should be, and we're going to set it high, so we're going to actuate the relay. We're going to do the same thing for R2. If the R2 cycle is false, that means we want a one shot. We're going to digital read R2 pin, and as long as it's low, we're going to set it to high. Now the next time through, we've got to then take that high and turn it back to low. So this nesting of these ifs is getting a little deep right now, so we'll go over it real quick. But the if R1 is set to run, and that's true, then the next if statement checks the cycle. If it's a cycle, we're going to do that digital write and flip that R1 pin. If it's set to one shot, we'll go down to that else statement. And if the digital pin is set to low, we'll go high, which will be the first time through it. And then the second time through it, since it's set high, it'll run that else statement. We're going to write that digital R1 pin to low. We're going to set that R1 run to false because it's a one shot, so it's only going to go through it once. That way it won't run this asynchronous delay or this portion of the asynchronous delay again. And then we're also going to send the command up back to the Nextion, to that button 0, to put it in the off state. Because in the cycle you'll tap the button to turn it off, but in the one shot you'll need to manipulate it or have the Arduino say, I'm done with the one shot, turn it off. And that's what that 0 print line, page 0, button 0.val. And we have it set as a global, so it doesn't matter whether on the settings page or not, it will send that command to turn it off. Then we have to do the same thing on the R2 async delay. So if R2 run is set to true, Then we're going to check and see if it's a cycle or a one-shot. If it's a one-shot, it'll go down to the else. First time through, it'll set the R2 pin high. The second time through, it'll set the R2 pin low. It'll also set the R2 run to false, so it doesn't run that again. And it'll print, but this time it'll be button 1. So it'll be page 0 button 1. It'll set it to false. Now, once again, though as I said earlier, this is going to run every 100 milliseconds. But we've collected the time, so what we have to do is we have to add to our delay. And in these asynchronous delays, we increase the R2 delay long to compare it up here, and we add that R2 delay length, which is 100 milliseconds. And that's why this function will run every 100 milliseconds. But right now we have our t time we're sending from the Nextion set to 1000 milliseconds, or 1 second. So if we go back to the asynchronous delay, when we get to the end of the if statement here, we'll just add the rest of the time to extend the delay. We'll add to the R1 delay long, so it'll take longer for that asynchronous delay to fire. But we don't want to add 1000 to it because we've already added 100. So we need to subtract the current 100 from the time that we send it. Now that one R1 relay time will change based upon the Nextion value. The R1 delay length really wouldn't change. We could just have that 100. But if you were to change it on page 1 at the top, then you wouldn't have to worry about changing it everywhere. We're going to do the same thing down here for async 2, but this one will be R2 delay long plus equal the time that we send it minus that 100 milliseconds. Now I'm going to upload this to the Arduino. I'm going to pull up the video on it so you can see it in action, and I'll have the serial monitor so you can see the commands coming through. So the way we have it initially set is the relay should kick on for 1 second when I press the buttons. And you can see I have little lights on the relays, so they come on when I press it. And it seems to work. Now we'll go to the settings and we'll change them to cycle. And the interesting thing is when I went to settings, it uploaded the time, RT1 and RT2, to the Arduino, even though we didn't make a change. And that's because of the way the keypad works. Every time you change something on the keyboard, it refreshes the page. So we went ahead and we added it so that every time that page refreshes, we send the values up. I'm going to leave 1 on one shot. So now 1 will cycle and 1 should just one shot. And you can see that one's cycling. And that one's one shot. And what's nice is they work completely independent. Now we'll adjust the time. And you can see I set the one at 500 and the one at 2000. But every time I set it, when I changed the 500, you got both timers got set, 500 and 1000. And when I adjusted it to 2000, you saw RT1 go again at 500 and 2000. We have it set that way so that every time we leave the keyboard, it's going to send both values. That way we don't have to worry about sending the wrong one or anything. We just send them every time. So now it's cycling fast. And that's just a much slower relay. I'm going to set them both to cycle. And now they're both cycling. And what you notice is that one kept cycling even when I changed pages. But now we'll see what happens when I go to the other page and change them to one shots. If you notice, the quick one stopped before I changed the page, and the slow one changed after I changed the page. So it really didn't matter what page I was on. The second I hit the button to change it to a shot, the Arduino changed it. It really didn't matter what page I was on. So that's kind of a nice little feature of it. I'm going to do a quick recap. We have this string that I'm starting to use where I use C:C as my beginning delimiter, and then my command was relay control 1. For this button it's relay control 2 or RC2, and then the value is on or off, and then we end it with a question mark. And that's what we do for both of these buttons. Now on page 1 we don't really do anything with these are just text, but these buttons we have the same format, C:C, and it's relay method instead of relay control, or RM1 and RM2 for the other button. And then we're either sending the value shot or cycle. Now in the Arduino we don't actually use the word shot, we just look for cycle. So we could leave that blank, or we could put anything in there and it would work. So if we see cycle, then we use it. If we see anything other than cycle, it is a 1 shot. And then for the numbers, we don't do anything on it. We do it based upon the page refresh, and we send it in, and we send that in instead of RC or RM, it's RT for relay time 1 and relay time 2. And in this case, we don't differentiate between the two, we just send 1 and then we send the second one. And we can use the same variables because we complete the action, and then we don't need to store anything, and then we can overwrite them for the second portion. And then just for fun, I showed you this Keypad here where you can unlock it, go into it, and on page initialize you can comment out this line that covexes the value from that page and puts it in this input text, so it never accomplishes that. So at the bottom, show text doesn't have any input text to put in it, so it leaves it blank, which is kind of a nice little trick. So now I had to tweak the home page for my project in the Arduino, and I had to eliminate my initial async delay, and I created 2 separate asynchronous delays. And so I had to have 2 sets of variables for each one, but I put the variables that I'm using throughout it all in the same area. And then down here where I have my normal async delay, I just have 2, and then I call 2 different functions, R1 async delay and R2 async delay. In my LCD input, I make sure that I have a command because it has to end with that question mark and begin with C:C. And if I do, I grab the command out of it and the value, and then I use those to do things. So if the command is equal to RC1, I set the run variable, or the R1 run. If RM1 is equal to cycle, and as I said, I don't actually use the word shot, but I put it in there in case I did decide to use it later. Then RM1, or my R1 cycle, is true or false, and then I do my 1 shot based on that. And then I collect my time, and I do the same thing for the second variable too. And then we do most of the work over here in the asynchronous delay, where if the R2 or R1 run variable is set to on, then we enter this portion of it. And if the R2 cycle button is true, then it's pretty simple. We just flip the output pin to turn the relay on or off. But if it's not set to cycle, then it's a little more complicated, but not bad. We'll execute this portion twice. And the first time we'll set the R2 pin high, and then the second time we'll set it low. We'll set the run to false so it doesn't execute it again, and then we upload, or we send a string to the Nextion to turn that switch off. So I hope that this video helps, and I hope you enjoyed it. It was a fun video to make. Well, that's about it for this video. If you like what you saw, consider giving me a thumbs up, and also consider subscribing to the channel. Thanks for watching.